Well, Coinbase, officially the first crypto company to join the S&P 500 after a week of headlines surrounding the platform. Just last week, Coinbase reporting hackers bribed staff to steal customer data. The company also confirmed a report that the SEC was investigating whether the exchange misstated its user number. So joining us now is benchmark analyst Mark Palmer. He's got a buy rating and $301 price target on the name. I guess before we sort of go through those flies in the ointment, I just want to get your take on the inclusion of this name in the S&P 500. It's going to get some passive flows just as a result of being part of the index. That has to be supportive of the share price, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, right now there are more than $7 trillion in various S&P 500 index funds. So you're going to have a lot of investors who are going to be indirectly owning crypto, whether they know they are or not. What's remarkable about this is that just a few months ago, the company was locked in an intense legal battle with the SEC, which was charging that its platform was illegal because it was trafficking in unregistered securities. Flash forward, obviously, a change in administration, a change at the SEC, and now we have Coinbase being added to the S&P 500. It's really a landmark day, not only for Coinbase, but for crypto in general.
Yeah, so I mean, in your estimation, is that SEC inquiry and then obviously this data hack, I mean, is that risky for investors, maybe especially those that aren't necessarily intending to invest in crypto?
Well, as it pertains to the news about the SEC investigation, frankly, that had to do with a metric that Coinbase had used back when it went public in 2021, verified users. The company has not used that metric for 2.5 years. This is a holdover investigation from the prior administration. We think it's highly likely that it will be dropped the same way that the other investigation against SEC was against Coinbase was dropped by the SEC back in February. So, we see that as a non-issue. As it pertains to the breach, any time that you see a breach of an exchange, that's something to take seriously. What we're talking about here, though, appears to be more of a one-off. This was not a breach of the company's firewalls. There were no customer information as it pertained to private keys, passwords, things of that nature that were taken. And so, it really comes down to a few compromised customer service contractors overseas. What's really important is that the company took quick and transparent action, let the market and investors know exactly what had happened, and created a remediation plan, which included moving those customer service support roles to the U.S. And promising to address any impact from this financially, which the company said could cost upwards of $400 million. But as far as Coinbase's response goes, it really was textbook out of Crisis Management 101.
Mark, the other interesting thing that kind of got unnoticed in the last couple of weeks because of all this other news were the comments from Armstrong about how in the past they considered a more aggressive Bitcoin accumulation strategy and decided against it. I wonder what that tells you about the company's overall risk tolerance.
Yeah, it's interesting. I recall I've been covering this stock since 2021. And in those early days, the way that management would characterize the notion of having a Bitcoin acquisition strategy would be a Texas hedge, meaning that the company already had exposure to the risks associated with crypto and its day-to-day operations of its exchange. So actually holding Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, would more or less be a double exposure to the asset class. But given the success that strategy, the former MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor have had in executing their Bitcoin acquisition strategy, and given the expectation that the price of Bitcoin will continue to rise, it simply makes sense for Coinbase to approach that issue differently, to get involved with a Bitcoin acquisition strategy on behalf of its shareholders.
Mark, thank you so much for joining us. It is definitely a definitive day for crypto with this inclusion. I look forward to see what happens, and we'll stay in touch.